quite a drastic change from the February meeting, of course. After 6 months, we've seen the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy meeting the US President. While a lot of talks on ending the war, we have to talk about the attire that the Ukrainian president wore, a militarized pantsuit, which also was complimented by the US president, and the kind of bonhomie. He talked to us more about the body language and maybe how the dynamics have changed between both the leaders, with, of course, Zelensky also personally thanking Trump in taking interest and major steps in stopping the war. And, of course, the letter, the postcard that Zelensky bought for the US First Lady Melania Trump.
That's right, on the part of his wife. That was sort of in response to a letter that Melania Trump wrote to Vladimir Putin that was widely publicized and shared on her social media as well, telling him as First Lady in so many words that saving children in this war and the next generation is the most important thing, and sort of a plea to him in a polite way, not so much mentioning in so many words, but about those alleged Ukrainian children who have been kidnapped by Russia, apparently has weighed heavy on the First Lady's mind and conscience. And according to President Trump, that letter was received very well by Vladimir Putin. And then we saw a letter on the part of First Lady of Ukraine given to President Trump to be handed over to Melania Trump, as a gesture nonetheless. And you're absolutely right. How different was this meeting? The mannerism, the way that Zelensky was received, the way he presented himself. He wore a suit jacket. And in turn, I think President Trump respected that. He was a lot more welcoming, a lot less confrontational towards Zelensky. You may remember when he was asked who is playing the better cards in this war between Russia and Ukraine. You remember in February, one of the famous lines was Trump telling Zelensky, "You don't have the cards." When asked today, he didn't take the bait, and he said, "I don't want to get into that. We just want to end this war and find a peaceful solution to it." So yes, a lot more friendly.
Right,
you know this, our viewers know this. Everyone knows that President Trump really operates on instincts and impulse. So it's very hard to gauge how he's going to show up in a meeting until he's sort of in that meeting and he's one-on-one or in a multilateral setting. That's when he will perform the way that he wants to perform. So it was interesting.
Right, Susan, stay with us. Let's just listen in to the major takeaways out of that press briefing.
Yeah, well, we haven't done anything on that yet. If you look back and you go back long before President Putin, it was always a statement that they would never allow Ukraine into NATO. So that was a statement that was made, but we haven't discussed any of that yet. We're going to be discussing it today, but we will give them very good protection, very good security. That's part of it. Make sure that if there's peace, the peace is going to stay long term. This is very long term. We're not talking about a 2-year peace and then we end up in this mess again. We're going to make sure that everything's good. We'll work with Russia. We're going to work with Ukraine. And we're going to make sure it works. And I think if we can get to peace, it's going to work. I have no doubt about it. I don't think you need a ceasefire. If you look at the 6 deals that I settled this year, they were all at war. I didn't do any ceasefires. And I know that it might be good to have, but I can also understand strategically why, one country or the other wouldn't want it. You have a ceasefire and they rebuild and rebuild and rebuild, and maybe they don't want that. But if you look at the 6 deals that we made peace and long-term, long-running wars, I didn't do any ceasefires. The war is going to end. When it ends, I can't tell you, but the war is going to end, and this gentleman wants it to end, and Vladimir Putin wants it to end. I think the whole world is tired of it, and we're going to get it ended. It was, I've done 6 wars. I've ended 6 wars, and I thought this maybe would be the easiest one, and it's not the easiest one. It's a tough one. We sell the equipment to NATO, and NATO does what, I don't know what the arrangement is that you have with, but I know that they want you to have the equipment. And we're getting the best equipment in the world, but they pay us for the equipment. Under Biden, it was just crazy what was going on. I believe the number is over 300. I think it could be $350 billion worth of equipment and money and everything else. And we've made more progress in settling this war in the last 2 months than they made in 4 years. So the First Lady felt very strongly. She's watched the same thing that you watch and that I watch. I see things that you don't get to see, and it's horrible. But when she's got a great love of children, she has a wonderful son that she loves, probably more than anybody, including me. I hate to say it, but she loves her son. She loves children.
And well, those were some key highlights of the U.S. President Donald Trump, where he's clearly calling for lasting peace, and he's clearly asserted that this is not the end of the road and there will be good protection, very good security given to Ukraine under the security guarantees, which the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy clearly said that Ukraine needs everything related to security guarantees. And well, our correspondent Susan Tehrani is here with us. Susan, let's also talk about how both the leaders were on the same page where they spoke about a trilateral meeting and for a lasting peace to end the war.
Yeah, very noteworthy indeed. And this was something that Zelensky and the Europeans really wanted to demonstrate, and not only to Russia, but to the world, that they're all on the same page. And with Zelensky saying that he hopes this trilateral meeting is going to take place, there is a glimmer of hope that perhaps they'll reach some kind of agreement that's good enough for the Russians to also come to the negotiating table. Steve Witkoff, President Trump's special envoy, yesterday on the Sunday shows, said that it was very unusual and very rare to see the Russians sort of become a little more mild in their demands during those negotiations with the United States and Alaska. He didn't give much detail, but there's no doubt that that kind of message and that kind of posture is definitely either it's been already relayed to Ukraine and Zelensky, or it's going to be relayed a lot more. And they've talked about it, and they think that perhaps they're at a place where this trilateral meeting could eventually take place. Whether or not it's going to happen sooner than we think, again, that's a big question mark. We have to see what Zelensky and by extension the Europeans are going to agree to when it comes to Russia demands. Where do they stand? How, and they're wondering how much, to what extent they can get a better deal from President Trump as well. There's no doubt that's also on the agenda. But nonetheless, it appears that, yes, they are all on the same page. They do want to end this war. On what terms? And is it going to happen? We'll have to wait and see.
Right, Susan, stay with us. We have some news coming at this point of time. U.S. President Donald Trump says he will be speaking by telephone with Russian President Vladimir Putin 3 days after they met and following the White House talks with the leaders of Ukraine and the 7 European Union leaders. Trump told reporters that he just spoke to President Putin indirectly and that we are going to have a phone call right after these meetings today. This as he met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy in the Oval Office. Right, Susan, like we were talking there, I also want to ask you that Trump did not really answer the question once a reporter said that is it a fair deal for Ukraine to give up land in return for peace?
Yeah, he didn't. He dodged that question. He dodged a few other questions, and he sort of reverted and diverted back to a lasting peace is what's important, and the war is going to end, and there has to be a diplomatic solution to the ongoing crisis. And those were the sentences that he repeated. He's been very measured, perhaps some might say out of character, when dealing with the media and the press. When it comes to these talks, he was quite tight-lipped during that so-called press conference after meeting with Vladimir Putin as well. And you could tell that he didn't want to give much away, which was sort of stamped by his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, again yesterday during the Sunday shows when was constantly asked about, what are the negotiating terms, what are the terms, and how is, notably these security guarantees and these land swaps are going to work. He said, I don't understand why anyone would think, or you would think, or the media would think that we would negotiate in public in front of the international community. These are private discussions, and they're going to fall through if we share any more. And it appears that the White House is really on the same page regarding that. You usually get some snippets from President Trump when it comes to talks like this, but he's been very tight-lipped, and yes, he's diverted many questions, that being one of them.
Right, Susan, stay with us. We just have some excerpts from the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy on being asked what kind of support and guarantee Ukraine is seeking from the U.S. Zelenskyy said that he wants everything. Take a listen.
What guarantees do you need from President Trump to be able to make a deal? Is it American troops, intelligence, equipment? What is it?
Everything. And really, it includes two parts. First, strong Ukrainian army. That's what I began to discuss with your colleagues. And it's a lot about weapon and then people and training missions and intelligence. And second, we will discuss with our partners. It depends on the big countries, on the United States, on a lot of our friends.
Right, Susan, let's just, our correspondent Tarani is still here with us. That's the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy saying that he wants everything related to security guarantees here. Susan, you're still here with us. Talk to us more about this, because ahead of this meeting, the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said that Germany's foreign minister said that Germany is perhaps stretched to provide any kind of security guarantees to Ukraine at this point of time. With Trump, of course, saying that he will be providing good protection, good security to Ukraine. How much of that will pan out? How much will the European countries and US step up in a bid to provide security guarantees to Ukraine?
Yeah, that's a very important question. And we talk about security guarantees. You know, it's just so all-encompassing. It's understandable that Zelenskyy would say he wants it all. Of course he wants it all. He even wants NATO membership, and he wants all his land back, and he wants Russia to leave without any concessions. He wants security guarantees with U.S. troops. He wants weapons. He said he wants to rebuild his military as well with the help of the United States and the European Union. That's understandable. It's his country. But nonetheless, the realistic aspects on the ground are very different. First of all, despite the fact that Europe presents a united front in dealing with Ukraine, a lot of countries are weary about to what extent they want to support Ukraine moving forward. And despite the fact that NATO is very strong right now and the countries are contributing a lot more of their GDP that they had in the past, they're also weary of welcoming Ukraine into NATO as well. So, while they want to give some guarantees, they also don't want to rattle things with Russia as well, and ultimately see that Russia is going to end up on their turf and they would have to defend themselves. So the security guarantees seem to be more in a style that's not threatening to Russia, but also in a way to keep Ukraine intact and safe from further invasion. At least that's what they're looking for. Now, what Zelenskyy has in mind, which is an all-encompassing kind of security guarantee, if it's being part of NATO or any NATO-style alliance that he's expecting is going to take place, it's not going to happen. So again, we'll have to see what his expectations are. He also said that he wasn't ready to cede any land prior to coming into this meeting with President Trump. But ultimately, the Europeans, despite the fact that they've been dragging their foot, they have stepped up to help Ukraine to a great extent. It's just, is it ever going to be enough for Zelenskyy? Is Zelenskyy ever going to be satisfied with the amount of help and assistance that he's getting? And one has to wonder.
Right, Susan, I was just coming to that, because while we are talking here as to how both the leaders, Zelenskyy and Trump, are on the same page for a lasting peace to end the war, but ahead of the meeting, Trump issued an ultimatum to Zelenskyy, saying that surrender to end the war, and that Ukraine has to give up NATO membership. At this point of time, do you think that Zelenskyy is rather being railroaded into a peace deal that Trump wants to broker with Russia right now?
So, there's one aspect of this, and the aspect is it's not like the Europeans were just standing on the doorsteps of Ukraine with a pen and a deal for Ukraine to jump and enter NATO. And the only thing that's stopping them all of a sudden is Donald Trump saying that Russia doesn't want that. Europeans know what that entails if Europe becomes part of NATO. They're already saying that they're not willing to assist Ukraine to that extent. For example, Germany does. So how much, despite what Europe says, is how much of its words matches actions is also another question, really. Maybe the Europeans are partly relieved. Maybe they do have this agreement with Donald Trump that they don't want Ukraine to be part of NATO themselves. They mentioned it, but there really hasn't been that kind of push. Now, part of European Union, that's another conversation. Even at the doorsteps of a deal being signed that Ukraine becomes part of the European Union, there's always those caveats on the part of Europe that in the long run, in the next 3 years, in some sort of capacity. So, Europe has to really be honest here and say what its real intentions are, despite the fact that it says that, it wants to provide utmost security to Ukraine, but doesn't bring it into NATO. It says it could give security guarantees, but doesn't bring it into the European Union. Going into the European Union might be easier, but nonetheless, Ukraine joining NATO was always a non-starter for Vladimir Putin. And some believe that when he attacked Crimea during the Obama administration, one of the reasons for that was Obama's push for Ukraine to join NATO. So, the issue of NATO is always going to be on the table for Ukraine, but it's hard to imagine that it would ever really realistically come to fruition. And no one has been pushing it the way Ukraine alone has been pushing it. So, whether or not Ukraine is going to be sort of cornered into some kind of negotiated settlement, that's a really big possibility for it to give up land and some concessions ultimately that it doesn't want to, is a very poisonous pill to swallow. But NATO membership, it's very hard to imagine that there was even a path to that.
Right, Susan. Right, Susan, stay with us. I'm also being joined by Peter Kuznick, Professor of History and Director of the Nuclear Studies Institute at American University. Professor Kuznick is joining us live from Washington, D.C. Welcome to WION, Professor Kuznick. First up, of course, big statements out of that media briefing between Trump and Zelensky, with Trump clearly saying that there is going to be a lasting peace. There is light after the end of the tunnel. Your assessment of those statements coming out of the White House?
Well, I hope that Trump's light at the end of the tunnel is better than General Westmoreland's was during the Vietnam War. Trump loved that session in the Oval Office. Or at least in the White House. He was the center of attention. He got to answer all the questions. All the NATO and the European leaders were sitting around having to listen to him. He didn't really share much. He blamed the war on Biden again. And he was very vague on all the other things that I heard. I didn't catch the very end of it, but I heard most of it. And he was very vague. He didn't want to, he was certainly friendlier towards Zelensky than he had been when they met in February. But when I watched outside as he was greeting Zelensky, first he had this frown on his face, and then he was very, very stiff. I contrasted that with his body language when he met Putin in Alaska, and was much warmer, friendlier. So he tried. And he's trying again in the Oval Office, in the meeting that's taking place there, to be more friendly and welcoming towards Zelensky. And Zelensky learned his lesson, and he's propitiating Trump. He's appeasing him and thanking him and giving him all the credit. So he doesn't want to repeat the mistake from last time. But we're going to have to see what they come up with, because Zelensky is in a very difficult position. He's losing on the battlefield. Morale is low. He can't resupply the troops. He's having a hard time resupplying the ammunition. Russia is making gains on the battlefield. And then he's up against his own constitution, where he can't just cede land, even if he wanted to. The latest polling out of Ukraine says that 69% of the Ukrainian public wants a negotiated peace settlement. Only 24% is opposed. This is a complete reversal of what it was 2 years ago. But a lot of them, a slight majority at least, don't want to trade land for peace. They're going to have to. It's just the reality on the battlefield. So And more and more the Europeans are recognizing that. Trump understands that. Putin understands that. The Europeans increasingly understand that. And there's also a weariness on everybody's part right now. Certainly the Ukrainians have suffered the worst, but the Russians also. When I was in Moscow a couple months ago, every Russian I spoke to was hoping for a very quick end to the war. They were very tired of it too. And the European publics are very tired of what's going on. And they're also wasting so much money. In addition, Trump's demand that NATO countries spend 5% of their GDP on the military is such a waste from what that money could be spent on in terms of education, in terms of housing, in terms of healthcare, in terms of infrastructure, things people really need to make their lives better. So the world is going in the wrong direction. And if Trump, through whatever means he has, can put us back on a path toward diplomacy, which became a dirty word during the Biden years, then I think everybody will be better off in Russia, in Ukraine, in Europe, and everywhere else in the world.
Right, Professor Kuznick, while you've clearly laid out your expectation out of that meeting between Trump and Zelensky, there's 7 European Union leaders as well who are there in the White House today, and they will be holding a multilateral after the bilateral between Trump and Zelensky. My question to you is that what are the stakes for Europe and NATO right now, with the French President Emmanuel Macron clearly saying that if we are weak with Russia today, we prepare for future wars?
Yeah, I think he's full of crap. You know, one of the big lies that the Europeans have been promulgating, this idea that if Russia succeeds in Ukraine, then it's going to start gobbling up one piece of Europe after another. It's been fighting Ukraine for 3.5 years and still hasn't taken the entirety of the Donbass. Is Russia really so idiotic as to think they're going to take on NATO and they're going to be better off in a war against NATO than they are against little Ukraine, where Ukraine in 1994 at its peak had 52 million people population. Now it's down to about 32 million. Russia's got almost 145 million, and it still hasn't been able to completely conquer Ukraine. And so they're not going to the last thing Russia's going to want to do is go to war against the rest of Europe. So but it's that kind of scaremongering and false reasoning. You know, you look at the false reasoning. The first point that they make is that this was an unprovoked war. They say it over and over again. It might have been illegal and unjustified, and I was opposed to it, but it wasn't illegal. It wasn't unprovoked. It was highly provoked. The second lie that they tell is that Ukraine, if we give them enough support, is going to claw back the territory that Russia has seized. Ukraine is never going to get that back. And the third is that they're going to start attacking Europe. We at least have to be somewhat realistic in our understanding of the situation and what caused it and what the likely consequences are going to be. The world is going to be much better off the sooner this ends.
Right, Professor Kuznick, on the security guarantees part, which Trump also said that he will be providing good protection and good security to Ukraine. How do you see that panning out? Because Trump has not ruled out American boots on the Ukrainian soil, but he also wants Europe to take a bigger portion out of that.
Knowing Donald Trump and knowing his MAGA base, he's not going to send American troops into Ukraine, into Europe again. But there are others. Poland has ruled it out. But now, I'm not very happy to see this remilitarization and central role being played in the military by Japan and Germany. Merz's remilitarization and just overall approach frightens me. I know Germany's history. But the Brits seem eager to send troops there, but they keep saying they're not going to do it without a U.S. backstop. So what we're going to really watch what comes out of this meeting today is what kind of backstop the U.S. is willing to provide. And we don't know. There's also the possibility, which makes a lot of sense, for an international peacekeeping force. That would include people from India, people from China, people from other places. I don't believe that Putin has any intention of restarting this war. I don't think that's in the cards. The Russian people certainly don't want that, and I don't think the Russian leadership wants that, except that I know that there are people to Putin's right. There are people who are hardliners who think that Putin is being much too moderate in his approach. And I hope that he's in a strong enough position to ignore them. His popularity, his approval ratings are sky high. If you compare that with Trump's approval ratings, Putin's are twice as high as Trump's. At the 6-month mark, Trump had a 40% approval rating and a 57% disapproval rating. That's the highest that any president has ever had after 6 months, other than Donald Trump himself in 2017 during his first term, when his approval rating was 38%. So he's, but this, at least what's going on now, gets Jeffrey Epstein off the lead item in the news, gets the terrible economic reports off the lead item, gets his firing the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics off the lead item, and gets his threatening to send 2 nuclear subs to Russia off. So he's presenting himself as a peacemaker, which is a much more appealing kind of role for him to play.
Nick, talking about Trump's shifting positions, I'll take that question in a bit. But first up, you say that the Russian president is not interested in stretching the war. Of course, we saw a softened position in Alaska, where he said that he wants Ukraine to hand over more of its sovereign territory in the east, with especially his eyes on the Donetsk and the Donbas region, which is a non-starter for the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. So how do you see both the sides perhaps reaching a common ground, a common position to end the war?
Well, Zelensky's caught between a rock and a hard place on this. He's vowed he's not going to give up any territory. Clearly, Russia's going to take at least as much as it controls now, but it's doing well on the battlefield. The thing that the Ukrainians have to understand is that today is the strongest position they're going to be in. That if this war goes on 3 months, 6 months more, Russia's going to control more Ukrainian territory, and there'll be thousands and tens of thousands more dead and wounded on both sides. That's the worst of all possible scenarios. At some point, this is going to end at the bargaining table. Let's make it happen quickly. Now, they're going to have to, according to the Ukrainian constitution, they have to have a referendum on ceding land. And clearly, Putin wants the land in Donetsk that he doesn't control. He controls about almost all of 100% of Luhansk, but only 70% of Donetsk. But if you look at it from the Ukrainian standpoint, I think it's actually a good deal for them. If they get security guarantees in exchange for giving up the rest of the Donbass, given their weak position, given the fact that they have so little manpower to draw on, that they don't have the arms that they need, that in some places, Ukrainian generals say, they've only got 10% of the troops they need to stop the Russians from invading, and that morale is so low, eventually Russia's going to just take that territory at a big cost for Ukraine and for Russia and the world. So I think they'd be smarter and better off to give that up in exchange for a secure peace and get to developing and rebuilding their country, which has been so devastated, and get those people back in the country who have fled.
If I understood your point there, you're mentioning that Ukraine is in no position to make a deal, and you speak that Ukraine should rather agree to the conditions put forward by the Russian president. So the feeling right now is that in order to secure peace, you have to give up land. Zelensky has clearly said that he wants complete security guarantees, but the question is, how different will this be? Because Trump clearly did not outline what kind of security guarantee guarantees, with European leaders also skeptical, with Germany's foreign minister saying that they are stretched at this point of time. And also, we need to mention that there was also the collapse of various previous security guarantees, to name some, the Budapest Memorandum. So how different will things be around this time if Ukraine is provided with a security guarantee?
It won't be different. It can't be different. There is no such thing as an ironclad security guarantee. Look at how many wars the United States and the world have been involved in since World War II, since the United Nations was founded. You know, there's just no such thing. It's unrealistic. What you can do is try to structure a global security architecture that's in everybody's interest. For example, one of the things that I've been very glad to see lately is the discussions between India and China, because Europe is the old world. It's a diminishing part of the global economy. You look at what the G7 represents, and it's really shrinking. But the future is India, China, the global South, the BRICS nations. So how can we create a different kind of global security architecture? How can we build on the idea behind the Belt and Road Initiative? How can Russia and the United States start talking about joint Arctic exploration and exploiting those minerals? Maybe a Bering Strait tunnel, but we need global development. And I think it's a huge mistake to waste the world's resources on rearmament. I mean, now NATO is going to go up to 5% of GDP, is what their commitment is. Trump wants Taiwan to do 10% of GDP. India is spending 2.3% of its GDP on its military. China officially spends 1.6% of GDP, below the old NATO level. But in reality, if you bring everything in, is probably close to the percentage that India is spending. That's money that could be feeding people, housing people, clothing people. It's tragic to see us waste all this money. So we need to have a different kind of arrangement. We need to have China and India working together. We need to settle Kashmir. We need to solve all these crises that could erupt into a new war. And I'm going to get back to this question about Ukraine having to cede territory. One of my favorite movies is a 1991 film by the great Japanese filmmaker Akira Kurosawa. It's called Rhapsody in August, about the atomic bombing in Nagasaki. And at the end of that movie, they're talking now. It's supposed to be they're in the Korean War, and one of the atomic bomb survivors hears a radio report that the United States is considering dropping atomic bombs again in Korea, and his response is,
"I am sorry." Yes, please continue.
His response is an unjust peace is better than a just war, and that's especially true in the nuclear age.
Right, Professor Kuznick. On the Kashmir issue, India has clearly said that it will not allow any third-party mediation. But thank you so much for joining us here on WION with your insights on this.
Thank you.